There is one place left on Earth where nature rules and no government controls it. It is a land that can be unforgiving and treacherous, but also beautiful, serene, and full of wildlife. It is the last great adventure for many travelers and my personal quest as I explore the last frontier, Antarctica. Since I was young, I had an intense desire to discover the world around me. That hasn't changed, just the level of adventure. Now, every journey has a purpose, and each time I venture out to explore new destinations around the globe, I am following my travel quest. The trip to Antarctica can begin in either New Zealand or South America, with the latter being the most accessible and closest route. I chose the closer route and booked my expedition with Quark. Quark is a specialist on both Antarctica and the Arctic cruises. Their programs, though, actually begin in Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires is a vibrant city with incredible architectural treasures and a culture that is part European and part South American. The most famous section of the city is the La Boca area. One of the pricier neighborhoods, it is rich in color, having used the timbers and paint from excess ship cargoes. This is one of the neighborhoods that became devout followers of Eva Perón, or more simply, Evita. She was the wife of the dictator Juan Perón. Because of her simple upbringing, Evita became the symbol and spokesman for the poor. Eva Perón is buried in the La Recoleta Cemetery, ironically surrounded by the tombs of the wealthy that she never saw eye to eye with. This cemetery is one of the unique sights of Buenos Aires. There is also a connection to another national hero, San Martin, the liberator of the country. His wife and parents are buried at the entrance of the City of the Dead. But it is Evita's grave that the public comes to see. As you stand there, you can almost hear her say, "Don't cry for me, Argentina." With a population of 63,000, Ushuaia is an eclectic mix of frontier outpost, tourist shopping extravaganza, and exploration base. The town could easily be mistaken for part of the Alps with its mountaineering charm and setting. It has, though, an ominous past it can't quite live down. Ushuaia was once home of Argentina's worst of the worst criminals and their political prisoners. They're Alcatraz. Like Alcatraz, there was only one successful escape. Ushuaia is an island surrounded by frigid waters at the bottom of the world. There was literally nowhere to go. It is fitting that Ushuaia is the jumping-off point for Antarctic cruises because it once hosted the greatest and most important exploration adventure ever, the HMS Beagle and its famous naturalist Charles Darwin. As you start your journey to Antarctica, you sail down the Beagle Channel. The channel is a long, about 60 miles stretch of waterway that winds its way out of Argentina and into the open ocean. This ocean could be the most treacherous waters in the world, dumping over 40-foot waves on a vessel. Or it could be as flat as glass. We reached the end of the Beagle Channel. I could see open ocean ahead. What kind of crossing is this going to be? A wild ride across a treacherous Drake Passage? Or a smooth, easy pleasure cruise? The swells were topping 20 feet, violent enough to send a good number of passengers to their cabins, but nowhere near the 40-foot waves I had heard about. This was considered an average crossing, and I never thought I'd say I liked average, but I liked average. The real adventure, though, begins the second evening when we reach the land down under, Antarctica. And with our arrival, the seas were calm and flat. Almost immediately, we're greeted by the Antarctic Welcoming Committee, humpback whales. These giants of the sea are migratory, coming south to the krill-filled Antarctic Sea before returning to the warm waters of the north to give birth to the next generation. At 62 feet long and weighing 40 tons, they are the third largest creature alive. To put their size in perspective, a fully grown adult can weigh as much as 6 male African elephants and eat the equivalent of a pickup truck daily. Before we continue, let's talk about who owns Antarctica. Well, it turns out nobody does. In 1959, a treaty was signed by 12 nations, including the United States, which sets aside Antarctica as a scientific preserve and bans military activity on the continent. This treaty was the first arms control negotiation established during the Cold War, and to date, 53 countries are part of the agreement. The scientific teams who work in Antarctica follow strict environmental guidelines, pledging to leave the continent as pristine as they found it. There is some amazing research being done on the ice, as it's called, and this is a shining example of what is possible in a world if nations agree to cooperate. There are a number of locations designated for visits by non-researchers, or, in the vernacular, tourists. Each allows one ship to anchor at a time, so no two ships will share a location. That is because a limit to the number of visitors per site is strictly enforced. The protection of the wildlife is the top priority of the exploration teams that bring the guests to this pristine environment. Our first landing brought us up close and personal with a colony of Gentoo penguins. Reaching up to 36 inches tall, they are formidable eating machines, consuming up to 2 pounds of krill and fish each day while chick rearing. The young are born at the beginning of summer to make the most out of the warmth, upper 30s to low 40s in the hottest months of the year. The summer of Antarctica is the opposite of the northern hemisphere, so December, January, and February mark the chick rearing season. The first thing you notice as you near a penguin colony is the odor. Trust me when I say that you can be thankful that smell-o-vision has yet to be invented. The second thing you'll notice is the huge number of birds. And penguins, of course, are birds.
With one exception, penguins are not social animals, but they're colonial animals, which means that they come together for all the important events of their lives, molting, breeding, hatching their young. And they do that to protect themselves from predators.
When I said they were not social, I meant it in the biological sense. They will not help rear other Gentoo's chicks, even if the parents are lost. They will not protect each other or help and provide food for an injured animal. It was early February, and there was a large number of newly full-grown chicks. This is how it should be in a healthy colony. For the chicks to have a chance in their first year, when as many as 80% will perish, they need to be fully fledged with their adult plumage before the warmth of the summer gives way to a very long winter. The wonders of Antarctica, even in this landing, which is rich in Gentoo and other birds, goes beyond the wildlife.
Getting up close to the penguins is incredible, but whenever I get a chance to get up high and get a panorama view, I take it. From here, I can see glaciers calving, the bay full of ice, and I can see the ship. The sight is beautiful.
The bay is full of ice, created when the salt water and waves undercut the glaciers. Not all ice is from glaciers, though. Large tabular ice sheets, large enough to hold a city block of homes, though it would be temporary housing, break away from the ice shelves. Ice shelves are frozen seawater that extend out miles from the actual landmass of Antarctica. Port Lockroy, a historic British station, was established in 1943 to secure an area of Antarctica claimed by early British explorers. In 1959, the station was closed after 16 years of year-round manning, and I mean manning since it was an all-male crew. The station was reopened years later as a museum, gift shop, and post office, and is now the most visited site in Antarctica.
Okay, we go 1950. Can you be back 1950? Yeah. Come back and catch a Zodiac? All right, enjoy.
This base is often called the Penguin Post Office, since a colony of Gentoos nest here.
Well, I'm here in Port Lockroy, which is the most southern post office in the world and the biggest souvenir store in all of Antarctica. I've got some postcards to send. I've got one for my brother whose birthday is 6 weeks from now. That should arrive pretty much right on time.
One for my parents and one for the other producer who's up in the warmth of Chicago while I'm down here in Antarctica. All postcards get an Antarctic cancellation and a 6-week journey to their destination for the low price of $1 US. Each year, Port Lockroy handles up to 60,000 postcards from explorers, ship passengers, and staff. The relative quiet life of penguins may not last long as we spot their major predator, a leopard seal, just feet from the colony, lazily riding an iceberg, waiting for the right moment to strike an unwary bird. This is a massive female leopard seal. Its name comes from its spotted coat, but it is appropriate in another, more ominous way. It is the stealth hunter of the Antarctic waters. It is the major predator of penguins, especially young ones trying out their swimming skills for the first time. But not all seals are penguin predators. The crab-eating seal eats krill, unlike what its name implies. They have a much more seal-like look to them, and they are the most common mammal in these frigid waters. At nearly 16 million individuals, they are the most numerous wild carnivore on Earth. After pulling out of Port Lockroy, our ship's destination is through one of the most famous and beautiful channels in the Antarctic, the Le Maire. This is a scenic wonder as mountains and glaciers tower over the vessel. Giant icebergs fill the narrow waterway, making it seem like a winter wonderland. Ice is one of the most striking features of Antarctica. It is literally everywhere, but the icebergs in the water, well, that's another story. Probably the best known activity in Antarctica is to get out on land and walk among the penguins. But it can be equally as rewarding to get in a Zodiac and tour around the ice. It gives you a chance to learn how to read the history of the icebergs. By looking carefully at an iceberg, you can actually understand where it has been and what it has experienced. For instance, blue lines show the previous watermarks, indicating how recent the iceberg was formed. Icebergs often turn and flip as they melt, and their weight shifts. A dippling, often referred to as golf ball effect, is created on these ice surfaces that were once underwater. But it is probably the color of the bergs that make them so striking. The deep, almost turquoise blues are an awe factor for even the most seasoned traveler. It is the density of this glacier ice, created under huge pressure, that only allows the blue wavelengths to be reflected and seen by us. After some time, oxygen begins to penetrate the ice, and it will turn the expected white we associate with snow and ice. And if you want to see ice, there is no better place than the Planu Bay just off the Antarctic Peninsula. In this area, there is a small colony of chinstrap penguins inside the larger Gentoo colony. Chinstrap penguins are smaller than the Gentoo. They are easy to identify because they have, you guessed it, a distinctive chinstrap marking below their bill. It was at this mixed colony that I had a chance to talk to a researcher from Oxford University that Quark allows to use the ship as his roving lab.
The point is to monitor a lot of penguin colonies to work out when they turn up to breed and the reproductive success of each colony. The reason we're trying to do that on a bigger scale is that until now there's been very few colonies monitored, which means it's anecdotal. If you monitor lots and lots of colonies, then you get an understanding of local variation and the different threats you can tease apart. We're talking about a lot of cameras on individual colonies. So we want to know how Gentoo penguins are doing in terms of their survival and reproductive success versus chinstrap penguins at lots of different areas around the Antarctic Peninsula. We have about 75 cameras in the Antarctic Peninsula and outlying islands, and those are on 3 different species, so Gentoos, chinstraps and adelies, and they take a picture every hour for the whole year.
Wildlife is the prime draw, but I couldn't overlook the history of this area. You know how I said I like to get up high and get a panorama view of an area? Well, this is another case of that. But here also I get a chance to learn about a French expedition that wintered over in this very bay. In 1904, the French exploration team led by Charcot anchored off this island and spent the winter in these unbearably cold temperatures. Their goal was to map Antarctica for France. I love the Antarctic and I love adventure, but these early explorers were way more adventurous than I can imagine. The greats' names, Shackleton, Scott, Amundsen, are still heroes to anyone that dares to visit this inhospitable land. I think going with Cork's expedition ship is plenty daring for me. Talking about daring, we cruise back north to one of the most misnamed places on Earth, Paradise Harbor. Don't get me wrong, the scenery is beautiful, but it is as foreboding as anywhere down here with giant glaciers covering the land and the waterways are clogged with floating ice. The name actually is from the whaling days where huge factory ships that processed the whales would anchor in these calm waters. So it was a paradise for the whalers, but not so much for the whales. It doesn't take long though before we find ourselves in a bit of trouble. We've drifted into an area of ice floes, not just here or there, but an absolute sheet of moving ice pieces all around us. Suddenly, right in the middle of a torrent of ice, our motor sputters and then stalls. It doesn't take long before we find ourselves in a bit of trouble. We've drifted into an area of ice floes, not just here or there, but an absolute sheet of moving ice pieces all around us. Suddenly, right in the middle of a torrent of ice, our motor sputters and then stalls. Our Zodiac skipper, Tyra, is quick and gets the motor up again. Slowly, we make our way through the mazes of frozen white obstacles until, finally, open water.
We made it. There was a couple of moments there I wasn't sure what was going to happen. We were stalling out in the ice in there. We were kind of like a giant martini drink without the vodka.
Now it's back to our original objective, shags and seals. And luck would have it, we spot 2 Weddell seals on shore. Unlike the more common and smaller crab eater, Weddells haul out on land, not icebergs. It would have been nice if they were doing something. This is television, not a magazine, but we'll take what nature gives us. Our last stop is the colorful cliffs of the bay where the blue-eyed shag nest. I like to call them flying penguins because their coloration is so similar. A member of the cormorant family, they dive after cold water fish along these painted cliffs, which provide predator-free nesting sites. The unusual hues of the cliffs are lichen and mosses that survive in these harsh conditions. Combine that with the greenish-blue vein of exposed copper ore, and you have the most brilliant landscapes of the peninsula. From here, we had one last stop before the Antarctic convergence, the area where temperatures drop quickly, causing the penguins' chief food, the krill, to explode in numbers. A part of the South Shetland chain, Deceptive Island is unique in many ways. It is a volcanic caldera that has erupted as recently as the 1970s. One end of the island still has thermal features like you would find in Yellowstone. But what is particularly deceptive is the interior. Instead of land like on most islands, it's filled with water. In fact, it is a giant ring with one break in it, with the center of calm seawater. It was that calmness that made it particularly well suited as a whaling station. Remnants, including the tanks that held the whale oil and a few of the buildings, still remain along the narrow shoreline. Antarctic whaling peaked in the early 1900s with mostly English whaling fleets working these waters. The number of whales taken were in the hundreds of thousands. These historic structures are a reminder of a brutal era not so long past. Today, whales are once again attracting ships, but this time with cameras, not harpoons. Antarctica is a special place. It's a pristine wilderness, a living laboratory, and proof that all nations on Earth can work together peacefully if only they choose. It is our duty and right to keep our elected representatives focused on preserving the last true wilderness, free from exploitation, weapons, pollution, and the vagrancies of politics that so infiltrates the rest of the world. Antarctica has no native people to speak for it, yet we are all citizens of this last refuge on Earth.